Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining. My name is Tessa Archibald, and I am a policy associate for the Animal Welfare Institute, and I manage the Homes for Horses Coalition. Just a couple things to keep in mind as we get started. Please stay on mute so we can hear our speaker clearly. And this will be recorded, so I'll send out the recording and it will be posted on YouTube, so you have access to that if you need to hop off or you're interested in sharing it with anybody. We will save questions to the end, but feel free to put them in the chat so that you don't forget them. Many of you joining today are members of the Homes for Horses Coalition, but for those of you who aren't, I can share a short introduction. The Homes for Horses Coalition has been active since 2007, when it started as a unique coalition to help horse rescues and ultimately help equines by ending horse slaughter. Today, Homes for Horses Coalition is led by the Animal Welfare Institute and American Wild Horse Conservation, and we have over 500 members around the nation and around the globe who are equine rescue directors, equine professionals, and equine advocates. HHG is dedicated to providing spaces for collaboration and connection within the equine rescue world, as well as furthering advocacy to improve the lives of equines through legislation and policy. So we have a great presentation today provided by our intern from last summer, Sarah Preston. Some of you might have actually met Sarah at our Homes for Horses Coalition conference in DC this past fall. Sarah is a senior undergraduate student at Bucknell University, completing a double major in animal behavior and political science. Her interests in equine policy first began when she worked with the Humane Society of the United States in 2022 as an equine protection intern, and she had the opportunity to observe policy strategy meetings along with legislative bill markups. These experiences exposed her to the breadth of issues facing equines and led her to pursue a second equine policy internship with the Animal Welfare Institute in 2024. In this position, she conducted the long-term research project focused on international equine slaughter policies, developed infographics, and assisted AWI staff with creating newsletters for Homes for Horses Coalition group. You may have seen that piece in one of our summer newsletters. Following her graduation from Bucknell later this spring, Sarah plans to attend law school or graduate school and later pursue a career in animal public policy. So we're so grateful to have Sarah with us today for this presentation. She has done so much incredible work on this, so I'm looking forward to hearing it today. Thanks, Sarah.
Thanks, Tessa. Hopefully someone can give me a thumbs up to let me know that you can hear me okay.
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. So like Tessa said, I was an intern with the Animal Welfare Institute last summer in their equine program. And one of the main tasks that I was working on was completing a long-term research project that sought to investigate the status of equine slaughter around the world. And so that's the purpose of this webinar today, is to share the results of my findings with all of you. Now, I'm going to be doing kind of a two-part presentation where the first half of the presentation will focus on horse slaughter, and then later I'll turn to talking about donkey slaughter because both of them together make up the equine slaughter industry. And because I have a lot that I want to cover in what's kind of a short period of time with how much I could talk about on this topic, I want to get started right away because I do want to leave some time at the end for questions if anybody has any. So, as some of you may know, we actually used to slaughter horses in the United States. Going back to the late 1980s, we were slaughtering over 300,000 horses per year. It wasn't until 2007 that the last slaughterhouse plant closed in the United States, and this was largely due to annual appropriations legislation, which is a bill package that Congress passes every fiscal year that included language to defund horse slaughter plant inspections. So, in simpler terms, they were saying that they could not use federal funds to fund these inspections, and without a proper inspection, these plants cannot legally operate. And then also around the same time, there was a US court that ruled that slaughterhouse plants could not pay the USDA themselves for slaughterhouse plant inspections, which meant that taken in conjunction with the annual appropriations legislation, these plants closed in the United States. But while the annual appropriations legislation is great for stopping domestic horse slaughter, it doesn't do anything to stop the exporting of horses to other countries for slaughter. And that's what we started to see after these plants closed. So looking in 2008, you can see that we were exporting almost 100,000 horses to Mexico or Canada for slaughter. And while these numbers have decreased over the years, in 2023, we were still sending, I think, over 20,000 horses to Canada and Mexico for slaughter. So I want to take the time to detail this process a little bit more because I think it should illuminate why we should actually care about the industry. So starting at the beginning of this process, you're going to have an original owner that for some particular reason has decided that they no longer want to own their horse. And there's some owners that purposely send their horses into the slaughter pipeline, but it's more common that they unknowingly sell their horses to someone who's known as a kill buyer. This kill buyer is an individual that will pose as a legitimate buyer at usually a livestock auction, but then once they complete the purchase, they will sell that horse into the slaughter pipeline. So a major issue here right off the bat is that the original owner might have had all the good intentions in the world to rehome their horse while they inevitably end up entering the slaughter pipeline. And then another issue is that this industry seeks out healthy horses over old and weak ones. And these horses can definitely be retrained and rehomed into other disciplines, which means that if exporting horses for slaughter were to be banned in the United States, for example, rescues, sanctuaries, anything of that variety wouldn't necessarily be overburdened by an influx of horses coming in because these horses that usually would have been sent to slaughter can be going into other industries. So now once the kill buyer has purchased a horse and they've decided that they're going to sell it into the slaughter pipeline, they're going to be going through really grueling and horrible transport practices with minimal rest, food, and water. And then things are just as bad once they get to the slaughterhouse. Usually welfare is not high at all in these plants. So as you can see on the map here, they're going to be moving to Canada and Mexico. And then from here, once they are slaughtered and then the resulting product is meat, that meat is being sent to countries in Europe and Asia where consuming horse meat is seen as a cultural delicacy. And so the issue here is that in the United States, especially, we do not raise horses primarily for human consumption, which means that they might be receiving a variety of substances, medications throughout their lifetime that is not approved for human consumption. And if those horses are then, going to enter the slaughter pipeline that have received those prohibited substances, that poses a major public health concern for the people that are involved in this industry. So this map that you can see here represents all of the research that I completed last summer, and it is an interactive map. So hopefully this works. I'm going to go out of the presentation and open the map. I'm hoping, can someone give me a thumbs up that you can now see the new screen?
Looks good.
Perfect. All right. So sorry, it might be a little small, but I want you to see just right now everything that's on the map, and then we're going to go into it a little bit deeper after I explain it. So both horse slaughter and donkey slaughter is displayed on this map. I'm going to explain it as a whole right now, and then later when I talk about donkey slaughter, I'll bring the map back in. So just so you have a better understanding of what's being represented here, I want to go over all of it. So you can see that there's a few different colors that are being represented. The main ones are green, even though you can't see it very much on the map, unfortunately, yellow and red. So countries that are displayed in green are countries that have either banned the horse slaughter industry or the donkey slaughter industry. I unfortunately didn't look at any countries that had banned both of these industries. Then countries in yellow are ones that have taken some kind of action to ban one or both of these industries in their country. And then countries in red are ones that really haven't done anything to stop one or both of these industries in their particular country. And then you do see in South America and Latin America, I did code some countries in blue. These are countries that I looked at that I either could not find any information for, whether they had an active horse or donkey slaughter industry or not, or it was countries that I looked at where the information I found was conflicting, that I didn't feel like I could make a sufficient judgment about what the status of that industry was in that particular country. Now, I did use the same color scheme for both horse slaughter and donkey slaughter. So the way that you can tell which industry the country is associated with is if you click on the particular country. So right now I'm going to pick Greece because I know that's related to horse slaughter. If you click on it, a pop-up will appear that will tell you what their status is. So here we have H banned. So H stands for horse. And then if it was donkeys, I had a D. And then I also included an explanation giving a little rationale for why that particular country received the status assignment that they did. So Greece in particular has banned the horse meat industry. I believe they did this in 2020. And so I attached the relevant legislation that this act was completed in. And then if there was any supporting information that I thought was relevant, like a news article, I attached that in the pop-up as well. And this map, while I'm not going to be going through all of it today, it will be shared with all of you. Tessa is going to share the presentation slides with everyone after the webinar today, which means that you can go through the map on your own time if you're wanting to look deeper into each country. And if you have any questions at all about any of the countries that I looked at, because I tried to summarize what I found instead of putting in everything that I looked at, you are more than welcome to reach out to me. My email will be attached on the last side of the presentation. So going back to this map referencing horse slaughter, the countries that I looked at mostly that were involved in this industry were countries that were in the Americas as well as Europe. And then you'll see later that there's one country I looked at in Asia. And so that was something I was not expecting. And then I don't think I said what the gray countries are. Those are countries that I didn't have time to assess. I did still look at over 50 countries, and that's what's displayed on the map today. So we're going to go back into the presentation and start talking about some of the countries that are in yellow that have tried to do something to stop the horse slaughter industry in their particular country. So starting with Canada, they haven't done much in recent years, unfortunately, in relation to the domestic horse slaughter industry and exporting horse meat to other countries. But I do want to mention that in 2014, they were the subject of 2 petitions that were filed in the European Parliament that argued that Canadian horse meat exports were not safe. Now, the European Parliament is an institution of the European Union, and many European Union member states are participating in this industry with Canada. So this was definitely something that the European Parliament wanted to address, wanted to see if these claims had any relevance, and they wanted to make sure that they were keeping their citizens safe. So after they received these petitions, they decided to instruct the European Commission to carry out an audit in Canada to see if, things were going okay in the horse meat industry, if it was unsafe, if other things needed to occur. And so the result of that audit was that Canada needed to implement changes to the horse slaughter industry to ensure the safety of EU citizens. These changes were outlined in a regulation, which in summary included that horses had to reside in Canada for at least 6 months before being slaughtered, and that Canada had to create provisions for the administration of medical substances in horses that followed EU requirements. A second audit was completed in 2018 to assess whether or not Canada had sufficiently addressed the EU's regulation. The European Commission responded to this audit in 2023, and they said that Canada had complied with the regulations. They had made changes in the horse slaughter industry to make it safer. They added that they would assess their compliance in further audits, but at this time, no other audits have been conducted, nor has the European Commission had any other public comments on this particular topic. But in other news, in recent years, there have been efforts on the part of Canadian advocacy groups and politicians to ban another facet of the horse slaughter industry that is occurring in Canada, which is the live exportation of horses to Japan for slaughter. So starting with the advocacy group, the Canadian Horse Defense Coalition is an advocacy group that is seeking to achieve both a national ban on horse slaughter in Canada, as well as a ban on the export of live horses for slaughter, not just to Japan, but to any country in general. So in 2018, they challenged the standards that Canada had set for shipping live horses for slaughter to Japan and any country, citing inhumane transport practices. The coalition did unfortunately lose the case in late 2019. They decided to appeal the decision, but then, as many of us know, shortly after the COVID-19 pandemic occurred, which meant that the appeal dates were pushed further back, and then it ended up being rescheduled to sometime in September of last year. But the coalition withdrew their appeal altogether because of developments that were occurring in the political sphere in Canada that seemed like a ban was almost going to be achieved in the country. So going to preface what I'm talking about here. In Canada, they're a little bit different than us in the United States, where they do directly elect some members of their legislative branch, but not all of them like we do. So we elect members to both our House of Representatives and our Senate, whereas in Canada, they only directly elect members of their House of Commons, which is like our House of Representatives, but not the Senate. And so in 2021, which is the last time that Canada had a general election, you had a variety of political groups that were seeking a majority election into the House of Commons. So that would be made up of all the members that are elected into that particular part of the legislative branch. And one of the parties was the Liberal Party, and they said that if they were elected in a majority in the House of Commons after this election, and then they would have the ability to select who the Prime Minister is in Canada, because that's how it works in their system for how the Prime Minister is selected. It's the head of that party that has the majority in the House of Commons. They said that if that majority was achieved, they would attempt to ban this industry in Canada related to exporting live horses to any country for slaughter. And so they did win a majority in the 2021 election. This is a picture of Justin Trudeau, who was their prime minister, that has changed since then, which I'll get into a little bit later. But he wrote a letter to the Minister for Agriculture in Canada urging her to ban this practice. The minister unfortunately did not act on this request, and so that led members of the legislative branch to introduce a bill in the House of Commons that sought to ban this entire industry. This bill was called the Prohibition of the Export of Horses by Air for Slaughter Act. It was introduced in the House of Commons last year, and it passed the House of Commons, as you can see, in May of last year, which meant that then moved to the Senate, which is similar to how it would work in our legislative system. Unfortunately, at this time, the bill has not passed the Senate, and even after passing the Senate, it would still need to go to the Governor General for a final approval before officially being written into Canadian law. And to add on to kind of this unfortunate situation, the Canadian Parliament, so that's their House of Commons and their Senate, they prorogued recently, which I see it as they kind of took a little break on the Parliament session. They were able to still re-meet in this session after they decided that that little pause was done. And when I first planned this presentation, I had written down that they were supposed to reconvene on Monday this week. That did not happen. Their entire parliament session ended on Sunday of this week, which means that this bill is dead because it didn't pass this session. If they wanted to introduce it again, it would need to be introduced again at the beginning of the process in the next parliament session for any kind of reconsideration. Now, what's happening in Canada is, so I said that Justin Trudeau is no longer the prime minister. He stepped down, and now somebody else has come into the prime minister position. And as a result of that, because they're having some changes going on in the government, it's required that a general election is called sometime this year. And so I believe that a general election is set to be held on April 28th, which means that things will probably change in the House of Commons, in the Senate, which is the two parts of their government that would be reviewing a bill of this nature. And now it had passed the House of Commons the first time, but it did not pass the Senate. The reason why it was having some difficulties is that the Conservative Party holds a majority in the Senate, not the Liberal Party, which holds a majority in the House of Commons, that was trying to get this ban enacted. And the reason why the Conservative Party seems to not be on board with this ban is actually in relation to us. They have not been very happy with President Trump's tariffs that he's been implementing. And so they think that it would be dumb for them to get rid of a prime agricultural market, is what the head of the Conservative Party called it in an article that he was quoted in February of this year. So I recommend that you keep an eye out to see who wins a majority in the general election later in April this year, because that will definitely be telling for what could happen for this bill in the future. Because if the Conservative Party wins a majority in the House of Commons, if that switches from the Liberals to the Conservatives, the bill might not really get anywhere in the House of Commons. It doesn't even matter if they get to the Senate, if they wouldn't even pass the House of Commons in the first place. So because this is a possibility, another option that advocates for banning this industry are looking at is possibly having the same kind of bill language included in a regulation, because that would not require any action on the part of the House of Commons or the Senate. And so this would require the work of the Minister of Agriculture in order to go through. And thankfully, there is a different Minister of Agriculture since the previous Prime Minister, Justin Trudeau, wrote that original letter. And this minister is seeming like they are interested in putting in place regulations to ban this industry. So definitely a current issue that I recommend you keep an eye out for in the news. So turning now to Ireland, they have been in the news quite frequently recently. So that's something I'm going to discuss after going through some background first. But in summary, in Ireland, it is uncommon to consume horse meat. So they're not participating in the horse slaughter industry in that way, but they're participating in it because they slaughter horses for export to other countries and they ship live horses to other countries for slaughter. And so the first thing that happened in their country that led to some public outcries about the horse slaughter industry and really revealed that it was happening in the country was a documentary that came out in 2021 called The Dark Side of Horse Racing. It showed that many Irish racehorses are shipped to Great Britain for slaughter after they are retired from the industry. And so some of them were not intended to go to slaughter. There were owners that came out and spoke up and said that they had not sent their horse to slaughter. They had sold them to somebody else who they thought was, giving them a retirement home. And then that turned out not being the case. And then in the Great Britain slaughterhouse, they were slaughtering horses in front of other horses. The deputy chief veterinary officer at Ireland's Department of Agriculture, Food and the Marine made a statement on the documentary saying that he was shocked to see the slaughter methods that were portrayed in the film, saying that it would not be acceptable in Ireland. At this time, they had only one slaughterhouse that was certified to slaughter horses for their meat to be exported to other countries. And then the chief veterinary officer went one step further to even say that he was satisfied with how things were being run in the slaughterhouse, which is interesting because last summer, a different documentary came out called Horses Making a Killing that investigated the treatment of horses in that horse slaughter plant. And it was pretty shocking what was revealed. It showed that horses were being struck and abused. There was a horse at one point in the documentary that was being kicked by a worker at the plant. So that's kind of concerning if, the chief veterinary officer knew that this was happening in the country and said that he was satisfied with it. And then the documentary also went one step further to investigate equine transport practices and food safety concerns in Ireland. So, what they were discovering is that many of the Irish racehorses were having fraudulent passports, which meant that many of them were probably not certified to enter the food chain because they had received certain substances that were not approved for human consumption. And that again is posing a really big public health concern for those who are buying those horse meat products. And so, because this created a lot of public unrest around this entire industry in the country, the Department for Agriculture, Food and the Marine suspended operations at the slaughterhouse plant. They revoked their license and their animal welfare officer certificate of competence, which meant that the plant could no longer legally operate. Now, the Homes for Horses Coalition group reported on this documentary and the subsequent events last year, and I know that because that was the article that I contributed to the newsletter. So I'm not going to talk about those events today, although once you receive the slides from this presentation, you can click on the link on the slide here to read that newsletter if you want a little bit more background of what happened right after the documentary came out. But because there's been some more recent developments, I want to turn to that instead with the time that we have. So, starting in last December, there was a transporter that was carrying both horses and ponies from Ireland, is where it was rumored to have originated. They were stopped in Dover, which is a port at the southeastern tip of the UK. It was stopped by port officials when they discovered a foal in the transport that was unable to get up, at which point they directed the transporter to a holding yard. And then they discovered that many of the horses and ponies on the transporter were not well. Some of them had pneumonia, some of them had strangles, a few others were covered in feces. There were 20 horses in total on the transporter, and there were, I believe, seven Irish thoroughbreds who were on the transporter. So that's how it was getting caught up in this entire situation. And five of those Irish thoroughbreds ended up being euthanized because they had such severe health concerns after being discovered. So, World Horse Welfare, which is an advocacy group that works in Ireland, they were notified of the transporter and took the remaining 8 horses that were not euthanized. So, it wasn't just the Irish racehorses that had to be euthanized, there were a couple others. They took the remaining horses into their care, which included 2 Irish thoroughbreds that survived. And so, because this was an issue that tied back to the issues in Ireland, they were interviewed by an Irish newspaper in early February this year. And a spokesperson for the advocacy group said a lack of a functioning slaughterhouse plant in Ireland was creating an issue because it was causing equines to instead be transported to slaughtering facilities abroad. So, shortly after, the same newspaper reported on the number of Irish racehorses that were slaughtered in UK facilities in 2024. It was revealed that 538 Irish racehorses were slaughtered in 2024. And of those 538 Irish racehorses, 308 of them were aged 5 or under. And then an additional 256 Irish horses in general were certified for export to French slaughterhouses in 2024 by the Department for Agriculture, Food, and the Marine. So, right after these statistics came out, Ireland's parliament responded. So, this is their lower house, and they discussed the findings that had come up in the article. There was one member of the parliament in particular who was not happy by what had come out. And he was asking why horses that were barely a few years into their lives, why were they being slaughtered for their meat rather than being rehomed? When he said, and I quote, the industry was receiving over 80 million euros a year in public funding. And then he wanted to know if they were going to address the issue of rehoming horses. Were they going to deal with the issue of systemic overbreeding of horses? What were they going to do to fix this problem? And so, because one of his questions was regarding finances from the government, the Minister for Finance responded to what he was bringing up in the Parliament session. He promised to answer his question once he had the proper figures in front of them. At this time, I have not seen that there's been any other movement in the Parliament on this issue. But I'm sure that they still have many concerns by what has happened, and there's probably going to be action taken in the future. And so, why there's probably more action that's going to be taken is because of something that happened last week. There was a report that came out that was commissioned by the Department for Agriculture, Food, and the Marine right after the Horses Making a Killing documentary came out. This report was supposed to advise the government on how they would improve identification, registration, and traceability in this industry in Ireland. And so, Professor Paddy Wall, who is a veterinarian that completed the report, while he did write down recommendations on improving passports and making sure that maybe they were digitalized, that there was a DNA system so that you could better track horses that were entering the food chain to make sure that those that were not certified for that industry were not ending up there at all. That was something he talked about in the report. But the main thing he mentioned that relates to what I'm sharing today is that he recommended that a slaughterhouse plant be reinstated in the country. He said that it was better that they would have a slaughterhouse plant in the country instead of, relying on other governments to have proper oversight over the slaughterhouse in their country. But the problem with this recommendation is that even before the slaughterhouse plant was closed in Ireland, horses from the racing industry in particular were still being sent to other countries for slaughter. So if you have a slaughterhouse reinstated in the country, that's not necessarily going to stop the issue that's occurring right now. And so the Department for Agriculture, Food, and the Marine responded to this report. They said that they welcomed their recommendations and findings. They were ready to implement them. And they set out a plan of action for when they were going to follow the recommendations. And I believe they're planning to reinstate the slaughterhouse plant later this year, but it has not yet been discussed by the parliament, tying into the previous concerns they were discussing. So I don't know where the slaughterhouse plant plan stands right now because there's still people in the government that are not on board with this happening. They would much rather see changes occurring in the breeding industry and, rehoming of horses. So that's again another issue that is developing probably as we speak. Maybe they're talking about it in the parliament today. So, moving to South Korea, this was the country I pointed out in Asia that I was very surprised to find any information on at all. I would not have expected that they were involved in the horse slaughter industry or that they were attempting to ban it in their country. So, South Korea is involved in the horse slaughter industry because they have a pretty prominent racing industry in which they import a large number of horses for use in every year. But unfortunately, when the horses are retired from the industry, they are typically sent to the slaughterhouse. And what's worse is that the South Korean Agricultural Ministry and the South Korea Racing Authority, they both encourage owners to send retired racehorses to slaughter to help bolster the economy. And the resulting products are then sent to grocery stores and restaurants. So the first major event that happened in their country to kind of set off a chain of events to hopefully drive some change for horses in their country was a PETA investigation that occurred from April 2018 to February 2019. PETA filmed footage inside the largest South Korean horse slaughterhouse, and they revealed that horses were being killed in front of other horses. So, again, that's something that was shown in the first Ireland documentary that I talked about. And then they also revealed that workers were repeatedly beating horses in the South Korea slaughterhouse. So, that was shown in the second Irish documentary. The group that was operating the slaughterhouse plant, three of their employees were ultimately charged for violating Korea's Animal Protection Act by slaughtering horses in sight of other horses. But this still was not really making the issue go away. It still seemed to be occurring. And something else that was revealed is that many of the racehorses that were being slaughtered were coming from countries like the United States and Australia. So around the world, people were upset that this was happening, which meant that they really needed to make a change in order to really respond to the public opinion. And so the Ministry for Agriculture and the Racing Authority in South Korea both promised to implement a retirement program for racehorses to ensure that this would not happen again. So, looking at where we are now, in 2020, the Horse Racing Authority published a very positive sounding press release on their website. According to this, they had been developing horse welfare guidelines and providing education on proper horse welfare to relevant officials. They also said that they had established a basic plan for improving the management system of retired racing horses and were actively supporting the project of converting retired racing horses into riding horses. They said that these aftercare programs were being funded by an outside group called the Retired Racing Horse Welfare Fund, which was a combination of donated winnings from owners, trainers, and jockeys within this industry. And then the Horse Racing Authority was matching those funds to also contribute to the aftercare programs. And then they also stated in the press release that they had been working to create a horse history system to track the entire lifespan of a horse from birth to racing to retirement. And while this sounded really great at the time, a few other things have come out in recent years that have kind of made it sound not super great. So the first thing that happened is that in 2021, the Racing Authority removed all of their slaughter data from their website. At this time, it's still not available. A spokesperson for the Racing Authority said that there were inconsistencies in the data, so that kind of suggests that that's why it was removed from their website. But then the spokesperson said that they're not required to manage that data. The Racing Authority is not. And so I don't know if the data is going to come back, if it's because it truly had inconsistencies that they're still working through. But it's been 4 years since they made that statement. So you'd think they would have found the inconsistencies at this point. Or is it that something else is still going on? They're still sending racehorses to slaughter and they don't want the public to know that it's happening because it did not go over well after the PETA investigation. And then in 2022, there were discussions being had in the South Korean National Assembly about aftercare in the racing industry. And it came out that less than 1% of retired racehorses had been retrained and rehomed since 2010. So that seems like a sharp difference to what they said in the press release. It seemed like they were really trying to make things better for retired racehorses in this industry, but they honestly were not rehoming them or retraining them for other industries. And then another individual in this meeting said that the big issue that they needed to address was the systemic overbreeding of horses in the country, as well as importing a large number of horses into the industry, because that was just creating a larger population of horses that they were clearly not doing anything with because they were not rehoming them, not retraining them, which meant that they were being sent to the slaughterhouse plant because that was what they decided was the thing that they could do with them. And so now looking more recently in 2024, things still aren't great for racehorses in South Korea. In February of last year, a racehorse was rescued right before the slaughterhouse that had connections to the United States. She was thankfully rescued and brought back to the US to live out the rest of her life. And then similarly, in October of last year, a group of horses were discovered in rough condition at a South Korean ranch with evidence of illegal slaughter occurring. So that's even worse than if it were to be happening in a slaughterhouse plant. Because even if, it's not super great already in a slaughterhouse plant, but they hopefully have at least some kind of oversight. When you're doing it on private property, you have nothing to hold people accountable for how they're treating the horses. And so that's most recently what has happened, which has led to more discussions being had in the government. In February of this year, there was a symposium in the National Assembly to discuss the status of horse welfare in South Korea. So again, addressing the issue of aftercare, the issue of sending retired racehorses to slaughter. And so you can see on the slide here that this is the flyer that was posted advertising this event. But it is yet to be seen if these talks will lead to any action being taken to protect retired racehorses from slaughter, and all horses for that matter, in South Korea, because it seems like they have been in a continuous cycle of a lot of talk but not a lot of action. But there's hope that these discussions will finally start to reach implementing a ban on this industry. So now this is my map being brought in because I'm going to start to talk about donkey slaughter now. So now I'm going to be looking at countries that are located in South America as well as Africa. Now, the reason why we have donkey slaughter at all occurring around the world is because of the ejiao industry. Ejiao is a gelatin that is derived from boiled donkey hides, which is very popular in Chinese medicines and cosmetics. To fulfill the growing demand for this product, China in particular has begun to import a large number of donkeys from Africa and the Americas because they have been depleting their own donkey populations. And so as a result, many of these targeted countries have seen a huge reduction in their donkey populations. And this is bad because many of the rural communities that are located in the Americas and Africa heavily depend on donkeys for transportation, whether that is to the market, to school, to get water for their family. So this is essentially their vehicle. I mean, imagine walking everywhere. If you didn't live in a city where, you can easily do that, you're living in the middle of the country where it's a considerable distance to get anywhere. It's really helpful to have that donkey to help you carry, water when you're only going maybe once every couple of days because it's so far. And so because of the ejiao industry, donkeys are being stolen, they're being killed and taken away from families that are really depending on them. And so that is what's really the biggest impact that this industry is having on rural communities. And then similar to horse slaughter, once donkeys enter the slaughter pipeline, there is little regard for their welfare. They're mistreated both in transport and in the slaughterhouse. And then to make matters worse, donkeys are stoic, which means that they don't broadcast illness or distress. So if something was wrong, they could go undetected for a significant period of time, whether that's in transport, once they're in the slaughterhouse. And so because they're eventually, going to be used for products that humans are using, that is a potential another risk for a spillover event. So that's when a disease is going from an animal to a human. So we do participate in the ejiao industry in the United States. We are the third largest importer of ejiao products. You can buy them online on Amazon, as you can see here. You can buy them in person. You can buy them on Etsy. So currently, right now, we do not have a federal ban on this industry. So turning to some of the countries that have made some effort to ban this industry in their countries, and starting with an entire continent, Africa has made some strides to ban this industry starting last year. So last year, they had a meeting in the African Union, which comprises all of the 55 countries that make up the African continent. They held discussions on approving a continental-wide ban on donkey slaughter across the entire continent, and it was approved, which includes a 15-year suspension on the commercial slaughter of donkeys for their skin across all member states. And so with that being said, you might be thinking back to my map because the entire African continent should have been in green. But the problem and the little, side piece with this ban that was approved is all of the African countries have to establish this ban through their individual national legislative processes, which could take years to be fully implemented. So what is reflected on my map right now for the countries that I looked at is what their status was before this ban was approved, as well as what they had been doing afterwards to implement the ban. And so the only country on the map that is in green is Tanzania, and it's not because they have implemented this ban per se, it's because they had a ban that was already in place before the continental-wide ban was approved. And so another example of kind of the lagging time with this implementation of the ban that was approved is that the East Africa Legislative Assembly, which is an organ of the East African Community, which comprises a few different countries in Africa, included Burundi, the Democratic Republic of the Congo, Kenya, Rwanda. They are having a meeting later this year to discuss the implementation of the ban, whether it had been implemented in some of these countries, whether it had not, what resources could be provided to them to get closer to achieving that ban. And so this is going to be more than a year after the ban was approved. So really showing that there is a significant period of time between when the ban was approved and when we actually might start to see some changes occurring in Africa. So, turning now to a few countries to talk about what they're doing in their particular states in order to ban this practice. So, starting with Kenya, looking at them before this ban was approved last year, they had legalized the trade of donkey hides and skins in 2012, which led to the establishment of four exporting slaughterhouses. The Kenyan government then halted operations at all four slaughterhouses in 2020 because of the negative impact this industry was having on families, in particular in rural communities. But even though they made this decision, an illegal trade in donkey skins was still persisting across the country to fulfill demands from China, and that continues to be a big problem for them. But they have responded well to the ban and are trying to get rid of illegal actions in their country to get to that full ban and hopefully get them to being green on my map instead of yellow, which is what they're coded at right now. So, starting in April of last year, which was after the ban was approved, their government launched a 100-day rapid results initiative to enforce regulations against illegal donkey slaughter and trafficking and to prevent the extinction of these animals. During this period, 15 cases of illegal donkey meat were reported and several smuggling rings were dismantled, especially in Nairobi, which is a major hub for this illegal market. And then the Ministry for Agriculture in Kenya, as well as Brook East Africa, which is an advocacy group, met to discuss gaps in legislation and regulations in this industry that traders were continuing to exploit to continue addressing how to get to a true ban that was fully implemented in the country. And then most recently, on International Women's Day this year, Brook East Africa published an article which was highlighting the work of a woman named Margaret, who you can see in the picture on the screen in front of you. She is working to protect donkeys in her community in Kenya. So this is even an example of civilians getting involved in banning this industry. And so women have been a major voice for banning this industry because they are hit hard by donkeys being stolen and being killed for this trade because they're fulfilling the tasks of bringing things to market, getting water, and without that donkey to help these communities, women and children end up performing the grunt work. And so they've really been trying to advocate for themselves, and as well as the entire donkey population to end this industry once and for all in Kenya. So moving now to Brazil, they're obviously not a part of the African Union, for which this ban was decided on for, but they are still a major player in the donkey slaughter industry in terms of exporting donkey meat to other countries. They have been working to end both horse and donkey slaughter, and these issues are included in a pending bill together. So this is something you won't find very often on my map because typically the countries that I looked at were only trying to address one of these industries, not both of them at the same time. But even though they have a pending bill that's set up for approval right now to end both of these industries, it was a long journey to get there. So, beginning way back in 2013, a bill was presented in Brazil's Chamber of Deputies, which is the lower house of their Congress, which sought to prohibit the slaughter of horses, mules, and donkeys throughout Brazil. During the bill's presentation, it was noted that there was strong public opposition towards the slaughter industry, and the bill presenter argued that equine should be protected by the state because animals in general are recognized in the Constitution. And it was also pointed out that equines were only being slaughtered in Brazil for external purposes, such as exportation to other countries or disposal. Inevitably, the bill was rejected by two different committees that reviewed it. The first committee was the Commission on Environment and Sustainable Development, so that is the CMADS, and then the Agriculture, Livestock Supply, and Rural Development Commission, which is a mouthful, that's the CAPADR. These groups, along with the CJCC Commission, which stands for the Constitution and Justice and Citizenship Committee, would all review bills on this particular topic in the Chamber of Deputies. In 2019, this bill was represented to the CMADS, so one of these committees, following the discovery of deplorable conditions at a donkey farm. The presentation of the bill now focused on ejiao and the possibility of donkeys going extinct, using these reasons to urge the passage of the bill. So this was a little bit of a different approach than what they did the first time. So even though it would still have an entire ban on slaughtering not just horses, but donkeys and mules as well. But this time they were just focusing on donkeys to urge its passage through. But unfortunately, the CMADS rejected the bill, but they voted in favor of a bill substitute prohibiting mistreatment within the equine slaughter industry, as that appeared to be the main demand of the bill presenters at the time. But still, that wasn't going to do anything to protect these donkey populations in particular from dwindling in Brazil. And so in 2022, a different bill was introduced that would ban the slaughter of equine and horse animals for the meat trade for consumption or export. And so this was approved by both the CMADS and the CAPADR committees. I'm not quite sure why it was approved this time because it's pretty similar language to what was in the bill the first time. But the most important thing is that the bill was approved by both of these groups. And since that occurred, the bill moved on to the CJCC committee, and it was received favorably last year when they reviewed it in June, but they have not made a final decision on the bill yet. It still says on the Chamber of Deputies' website that the bill is ready for agenda in the CJCC, but at which point it's going to be reviewed is not known at this time. It is exciting that this bill did get further in the legislative process, but something to keep in mind is that now that the African Union has, approved a ban across the entire African continent. And, as they start to maybe having some of these member states fully implement that ban in their state, China might start to look towards other countries in order to fuel this industry. And one of those countries could possibly be Brazil. So that's something to keep in mind if the bill is going to be reviewed again, is seeing if, unfortunately, the CJCC committee takes those potential economic partnerships into consideration when they review this bill, or if they're finally going to actually put this bill through to go to the next step of the legislative process, which would be a huge win for not just donkeys in Brazil, but horses as well. And so many of you might be wondering what we're doing in the United States to ban one or both of these industries. And so the good news, as you can see on the map here, is that the United States is coded in yellow, which means that they're either taking action against one or both of these industries. And I'm happy to say that we are taking action against both the horse slaughter industry and the donkey slaughter industry. So starting with the horse slaughter industry, right now there is a legislative bill that is introduced in the House of Representatives and the Senate called the Save America's Forgotten Equines Act, the SAFE Act. And so this would not just ban the export of horses to other countries for slaughter, but it would also permanently ban the domestic slaughter of horses in the United States. And so the reason why that second part is important in being included in this pending legislative bill is thinking back to the annual appropriations legislation language that I referenced way at the beginning of my presentation. That language has to be reviewed and reevaluated every fiscal year when that bill package is passed. And so I believe it was in 2011, the language was not included in that bill package in order to defund horse slaughter plant inspections. And as a result, a few different slaughterhouse plants sought licenses from the USDA in order to start slaughtering horses again. Fortunately, these plans never actually went through because there were so many court challenges. And then by the time we got through all those challenges, it came up to the next fiscal year, at which point the language was re-included in the appropriations legislation. But this points out that this language could always be removed from the appropriations bill every single fiscal year, and we could get to that potential situation again. So having a permanent ban on this industry would be the best way to protect horses in the United States. And so if this is something that has resonated with you during this presentation, we highly recommend that you reach out to your legislators, to both your senator and your representative member. Let them know what you learned in this presentation today. You can also go to the link that I have put on this slide that's underneath the SAFE Act that will take you to the Animal Welfare Institute's page on horse slaughter on their website, where you can read a little bit more about why this industry is so detrimental and why we should ban it. And then you can share that when you call your legislators. If you're not quite sure where to start with that, you're more than welcome to reach out to Tessa. She would be happy to help you with how to contact your legislators, maybe even connect you with someone at the Animal Welfare Institute who could provide you with some more guidance if it's your first time contacting your legislators. But another option on the Animal Welfare Institute's website right now is an action alert. So if you click on that same link that I put under the SAFE Act, it will take you to a form that is already filled out with all the reasons why this industry is so bad. And if you put in your address information, it will automatically send that message to your legislators. So that's another way to communicate with them and let them know that you want to see this industry banned. Now, turning to the donkey slaughter industry, the ejiao Act was introduced in the past. It would ban the sale and the purchase of ejiao products in the United States, as well as the sale of donkeys and donkey hides for that same purpose. It has not yet been reintroduced in this legislative session, but it's hopefully going to be reintroduced later this year. So keep an eye out on the Homes for Horses Coalition newsletter to see when that occurs. Keep an eye on the news. But even though it has not been reintroduced yet, you can still contact your legislators about it because many of them don't even know that this is an industry that exists in the United States. Share with them what you learned in this presentation today. Again, I linked the page on the Animal Welfare Institute's website that explains a little bit more about the industry if you'd like to refer to that before you contact them, but let them know that it's likely to be reintroduced later this year. And then if you are joining us today from a rescue, from a sanctuary, or a related industry, you are in a unique position where you have frequent contact with the community. And so we highly encourage you to share resources with the community about these issues. The first link that I have put on this slide is to brochures that you can order from the Animal Welfare Institute for free on horse slaughter. And then the second link takes you to a Google Drive folder that has a variety of resources in it, which includes a fact sheet on horse slaughter as well as donkey slaughter. And so that's a great thing that you can do if you're in that particular role in your community. So if you have any questions about what you heard in the presentation today, you're more than welcome to reach out to me, to Tessa. We'd be happy to answer the questions for you. But if you have any questions today, while we still have some time, I would love to have the chance to answer them for you guys.
Thank you so much, Sarah. That had so much incredible information, and I love how up to date it was. You were like, yeah, last week this happened. That is such a unique opportunity for all of us to learn from you and all the incredible research that you've done. And there's still a lot of work to do, obviously, but it's incredible and kind of heartening to hear about all of the work that is being done in other countries and all of the equine advocates that exist all around the world. If anybody has any questions, you're getting lots of claps in the chat also. Outstanding. Thank you. Let's see. Kayla does have a question. Is there a is there a particular area of the globe or country where efforts should be focused in regard to the equine industry? Oh, I think you're still on
Sorry, I
mute.
didn't realize I was muted. So my answer to that question is yes, in my opinion, there is a part of the world that effort should be focused on, and that is in South America, because it seems, if you go back to my map, a lot of those countries are in red, which means that efforts haven't even started to ban, in particular, the horse slaughter industry. And so the country that stands out to me the most is, I believe it's Argentina. They actually have a law in place that says the government is to facilitate a horse slaughter market, and they're supposed to encourage the growth of it. So that's clearly an issue of having that in place if, you're wanting to start to drive change for horses in that particular country. But then in terms of donkey slaughter, I would recommend that, action be done in the countries while I didn't have time to look at it, the countries that are using the ejiao products and, trying to understand maybe their reasons for using it and then helping them find alternatives to why they're using them in the first place. Because I think if we're able to and that interest in the industry, there's going to be no reason for stealing donkeys for this industry because nobody's going to end up buying the products.
Thanks, Sarah. We do have a question from Tracy that asked, I have read that the AVMA does not support the SAFE Act, which is true, and that it will not pass Congress without this endorsement. Is that true?
So that's a good question. I'm actually not quite sure if it's true that it wouldn't pass without the endorsement. I mean, my understanding is that in Congress, you're getting the votes from the Congress member in order to pass a bill. So I think, where they might play a role is being an interest group, where maybe they'd be talking to particular legislators about not passing it. And so that's why it's more important than ever for more members of the public to share with them why the bill should be passed. Because when you're a legislator, if I was a legislator, I would seek to, implement legislative acts that are kind of, surrounding a consensus of what everybody really in the public seems to want. And so the more people that contact their legislators, let them know this is an issue that they are interested in, that is going to sway, hopefully, their opinion on this matter and encourage them to vote yes on the SAFE Act as well as the ejiao Act once it is reintroduced.
Yeah, definitely, Sarah. Kathleen had a question. She says, probably not a popular question, but wondering where horses raised specifically for meat fit into the picture. For example, do you know what percentage of global horse meat is from these animals?
Yeah, so that's a good question. At least from the research that I did, it seemed like there wasn't necessarily a country that was primarily raising horses for meat. It was, they were having them in other industries, and then they were seeing that as an economic opportunity for, where to use them after they were had outlived their time in the particular industry they were in. So that's unfortunately a question that I wouldn't be able to answer. But I'd be more than happy if you reach out to me. I'd be willing to do a little bit of research to answer that question if that's something that you'd like to know more about.
Thank you. Stephanie had a question. Can you mention briefly, if anything, what Mexico is doing about slaughter?
Yep, so I'm gonna go if I can escape. I thought I could because I'm gonna bring the map back up. I might have to unshare for a second to bring it up. Let's see here. All right, so bringing back to the map. All right, so if you click on Mexico here, they unfortunately don't have a ban on the domestic horse slaughter industry, which is, they're receiving horses from the United States primarily, and then they haven't banned the export of horse meat to other countries. But the one effort that has been made that I did find in my research is it wasn't just Canada that was named in the petitions to the European Parliament of having unsafe exports. It was Mexico as well. And so they had an audit that was conducted in their country, and it was discovered that they really did not have safe conditions in the industry. And so at this time, horse meat is banned from entering the European Union. So that's definitely a big step because there's a large number of countries in the European Union that are participating in this industry. And so because we're really trying to show that horse meat is not safe because it's coming from individuals that are, involved in other industries that have been receiving substances, medications that are not approved for human consumption. Hopefully this move and, it continuing to be in place will encourage other countries to start looking at where their horse meat is coming from and have them reevaluate where they're getting it from, which might have them turn back to Mexico, and decide that they don't want to be involved in that industry with them. So I'm hopeful that more action will be taken, but I'm glad that at least some action has been taken in the European Parliament in regards to Mexico.
Definitely. That's a good step to try and, shut down the demand as well. Jessica had a question. Does the slaughter industry move from country to country as they exhaust supply? I know you mentioned that a little bit regarding ejiao.
So yes, I think that it does move from country to country when, it's banned in a particular area, then countries are looking for other options in order to still facilitate this industry. So that's why it is important that so many countries are taking action against this industry, because the more that are, the fewer countries that are willing to, enter into these kinds of trade relationships with different countries. And that will hopefully eventually lead to, I mean, in a perfect world, we would have a global ban on both of these industries.
Susan had a question. She says, I missed the beginning. You may have covered. And I know the presentation was focused more internationally, but she asks, in the USA, what's the current status of horse processing for zoo meat? Bravo packing in New Jersey and the plant in Wisconsin. Nebraska used to be a source. Are any of these still operational or supplying zoo carnivores? Do you know, Sarah?
I do not know, but I can tell you that that is something they do in Germany. That's something that I found is that once horses are getting old, owners decide to donate them to, I think it was the Berlin Zoo, is what I found. So that's definitely another part of the industry that I think hasn't been addressed in some countries yet, but should be because it is a contributor to why this industry is still occurring.
Let's see. Winaya has a message and they say, greetings from Indonesia. Thank you,
Oh.
Sarah, for this wonderful presentation. I'm aware that carriage horses in Indonesia are mostly sent to slaughterhouses when they are fatally injured, sick, or if owners need instant money. Not sure how big the industry is, but I have heard a few cases. I am unfamiliar with the racing horse aftercare in the country, unfortunately. I don't know if you had a chance to do any research there, but thank you for joining us, Winaya. It's great to have you.
Yeah, thank you for joining us. And unfortunately, I didn't have a chance to look at Indonesia. But now that you said that, I think that's something that I'm going to look into because that's interesting that it's from the carriage industry. I didn't know that that was big in Indonesia, and that that was a reason why some horses are being sent to slaughter there. So thank you for joining us and being interested in this issue, and encourage you to contact members in your legislature back home to start driving some change for um, the equines in your country would be great.
Nikki had a question about things that people can do to take action. Besides reaching out to government officials, do you believe that attending auctions and outbidding kill buyers makes an impact? I don't know if that's something that you have familiarity with.
So, I've seen that, some different groups are taking that action where they're deciding to outbid the kill buyers. But the reality is that if that's all that you're doing, that's never fully going to solve the issue. You really do need to talk to the people that could possibly, enact a ban on this industry. So that's where your legislators come in. I think that something that you could do is you could definitely go to different facilities and document some of these things happening. And you could always bring that to your legislators, or look at, work with other organizations, see where you can volunteer your efforts to document this industry occurring in the United States, provide that with your legislators so then they can see that this truly is happening and that it's occurring at such a wide scale. And then again, give them the reasons why this industry is so detrimental.
Thank you so much, Sarah. You did such an incredible job today, seriously. And I think everyone who registered will be so excited to get this presentation recorded and use the map. So thank you again. You're getting lots of great messages in the chat. And I think we will log off here as we're at time. So thanks everybody for joining, for attending, for learning. And thank you, Sarah, so much for all this research.
Thank you guys for
Bye-bye.
joining us today.